Okay, Robert, thank you so much for doing this. Let's start with, let me ask you where you are right now and where you were born and where you are right now, and maybe some story that connect these two places, even if they are the same.
Okay, so right now I'm talking to you from my basement in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was born a long time ago, back in Fort Ord, California. And how am I connected to these two places? Basically, my father was in the Navy, and that was the first place he was stationed. Um, and I was born there in the hospital there. And Fort Ord, California is Monterey, California. And basically, he moved with the service with the Navy, and he went from West Coast to East Coast, and we ended up growing up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I went to school in state, and I fell in love with the University of Virginia. And I'm a six-finger academician, not by choice. I ended up doing all three degrees at the University of Virginia, and kind of settled
What's
in
a six-finger academician?
inbred. I've had too many, genetically not diverse because I've had too many. I like to call it that way. But I did environmental sciences, having grown up playing in the wilds of southeastern Virginia, camping and running around in the marshes and rivers and fishing. And I came to the University of Virginia, uh, one of three uh, public schools that I applied to. And my first time on campus was the day I arrived to move in, and I've just kind of fell in love with Charlottesville. So I've been here ever since, and I've raised my family here, and I'm still here. I like it. It's a nice blend. So that's how I'm here today. And I've used it as a home base to allow me to go all around the world and do all sorts of crazy, wonderful, some things magical, sometimes I believe magical things. So that's why I am here right now in my basement talking to you. That's how I went.
Well, and all these movements around the world, that's also how we met. And I have this I had the chance to listen to some of these of your stories, and they are amazing. So let me ask you, with all these experiences that you had, how do you see the world that we are today? Do you think it's a better world? Do you think the world is getting better or it's getting worse? Are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
Oh wow, yeah. I'm glad that was a short first question to start things off. Thank you. No, I mean, okay. So first, let me describe what kind of person I am. I remember when I was in middle school, we were at church, we were at mass. I was raised Catholic, and the priest had a story during a homily, and he talked about two brothers on Christmas morning, and they were twins, and one was optimistic and one was pessimistic. And it's Christmas morning. They run downstairs, and they don't. They see the tree, but there's no presents under the tree. And the pessimistic one's like, "Oh man, we just got screwed again." And the optimistic one was like, "No, it's got to be here somewhere." So the parents kind of said, "Well, why don't you check out back?" So they went out back and they took a look, and there was a great big dumpster, and in that dumpster was full of horse crap. And the one pessimistic one's like, man, it's horse crap. And the optimistic one dove right into it. And as he dove right into it, his twin brother, who was pessimistic, said, "What are you doing?" And he looks at him, he said, "With this much horse crap in here, there's got to be a horse." So I like to think of myself as the optimistic one looking for a horse in all the midst of all the horse crap. And with respect to the world today, I'm excited. I'm excited for the following reason. Um, I'm excited because I don't think I think we haven't really developed in the sense that we haven't realized our potential. And I think that I'm excited because we've forgotten a few things. And I'm excited because I can see ways that by, well, here's the irony. We've never been more connected, as evidenced by you and I right now on this StreamYard call. We've never been more connected at any time in human history, but yet we're so disconnected. And what I mean by that is we place such a faith into technology as a whole that we've forgotten the human side of things, which is that interconnectedness, that idea of we're more connected than ever, but I think we're maybe less present in the moment than ever, if that makes sense. You know, we've
Yes.
kind of forgotten how to live, and in some ways, I know this might sound kind of a little bit wackadoodle or crazy, but I kind of view the you can look at the pandemic that we're in, and you can think of it in two ways. Yeah, it's definitely a disruption, and a lot of people see the negatives to it, and they're obvious, the negatives. But I also see it as a positive disruption because what it's forced us to do is stop, change the way that we've had to live. And in many cases, I know a lot of people personally for the first time in their adult lives as workers, where they're working from home, where they've actually been able to wear shorts all day. They've been able to walk outside. They've been able to see the trees. They've been able to watch the seasons change. They've been able to listen to birds. They've been able to see the flowers. And they've done this while not having to be stuck in cars, commuting back and forth to go sit in an office somewhere to essentially do what we're doing now. And in some ways, we've had to figure out ways to work not harder, but work smarter. We've had to find ways where we can be present. And I think that during the pandemic, we've actually had to confront things that I know you're confronting and I confront, which is a work-life balance. How do you deal with little ones in the house? How do you deal with the demands on home? How do you all of a sudden everything is placed at kind of the same level of importance. It's so immediate. You can't outsource your home life by driving to the office every day because in many cases we've been home and office are the same thing. So we've had to reconfigure our mindsets. So I'm kind of optimistic about that. I'm also optimistic that for the same reason that this connectedness is a two-edged sword, and I think some people have viewed the connectedness. It's definitely got a positive, but with our young people being connected, I think we have an opportunity to help them be present while being connected. So that, in my mind, is where I see the upside. I see the upside. I see the upside in being connected, being aware. You and I can think back to a time maybe 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago, when we weren't connected and we were doing stuff in isolation and we didn't have a more global awareness. And I think that we have a global awareness. We are connected. We see that there's an area that we can improve upon in terms of being present. So I think in some ways we're more aware than ever before. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? So I'm optimistic. That's my nature. Cautiously optimistic. And what I think is remains for us is to focus a little bit more on this idea of servant leadership, or this idea of paying it forward. So that to me is why I'm optimistic.
So you would say that what are the challenges that you see ahead, right? And I can identify one in what you said, which would be uh, being more present while being more connected. And do you see like this as the biggest challenge, or do you see other challenges? How are you concerned or seeing this non non-executed potential, no, or that you mentioned that we still can get better?
So it's a good question about unrealized potential and this notion of what are some of the major challenges. I think the biggest challenge is this idea of being present, this idea of not always thinking about, not always focusing either on what has happened or what is coming, is what is going to happen, of being distracted. And that's the two-edged sword, I think, of technology. I mean, I've got a Fitbit on. I got one of these in my hands, a cell phone. I've got my earbuds that I can put in. I got Bluetooth. I've got Teams things. I got reminders everywhere. I've got people have Alexi, and or not as Alexis, whatever, I forget. I don't even use it at home. They want to introduce all this technology, but in some ways, I almost view it as we're rushing to become the Matrix, that old movie where we're plugged in all the time. And I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that as human beings, we need that We need that quiet time, that time to be introspective, that time to sit and think, that time to just be, that time to just breathe. So part of it is like I know with my own children that are a bit older now, 21 and 19, 22 and 19. Sorry, the years fly by as you get older. Um, Part of the challenge is to get them to slow down and just look at the day with a bit of a beginner's mind, to appreciate the wonder, to take what people call as a awe walk, getting outside, realizing there's stuff bigger around you, that everything doesn't have to focus on someone progressing through life like it's a video game or some ladder to climb to arrive at a goal. I mean, it's about reminding people about the day-to-day journey as opposed to the destination, right? And I think technology in many ways distracts us from the day-to-day grind. And I got to say, during this pandemic, one of the things that I've experienced firsthand, whether it be with my friends or my coworkers, is how far just taking 5 or 10 minutes to not talk about work, but to ask someone about how they are. How are you? Not just like, oh, tudo bem, como vai? And it's just a perfunctory, right? It's not that. It's more like, no, how are you doing? What's going on? Share a little bit about it. And what's funny is that that's something that I learned or have reinforced in all my international work is that no matter, I came in with my own sense of agenda, my own sense of time. And then it was only through many repeated measures that I learned to have respect for the way those with whom I wish to engage acted. And oftentimes we would start off our engagements, our meetings, our discussions with, how's your family? How's life back home? How are the flowers in your garden this year? Do you have any fruit on your trees? Just how is life, right? And you start with how is life first. And then from how is life, you focus, you shift, you transition into the more challenging things, maybe, and not more challenging, but you shift to those things that are matters at hand. Does that make sense? And
It does.
yeah.
I, I have a question there. Like, this is a challenge for me personally because I have this, or and I'm rethinking it. Like I'm acknowledging is a challenge, so it's something that I try to change, right? Um, because I always think, oh, we have to, how do you say, optimize for efficiency,
Ah,
right?
okay.
So you go to a meeting like this, and okay, let's optimize for efficiency. Let's get it done, and many times you don't accomplish your goals,
Hmm.
and because that's I like what you said that I go with my agenda, but the person I'm going to engage has their own agenda,
Yeah.
right? And yes, so my question is, how do you and okay, my mind is going fast, my brain is going faster than my mind, but I'm always also thinking about what you said, like living the present and how we are in a hurry all the time. So you didn't say this, but somehow what you're saying about, like what's the next thing? What's the next thing? We are in a hurry all the time. And I have this impression that we are taught to optimize for efficiency, even in our relations, in our relationships. And maybe this ends up not being efficient, right?
So
Or not accomplishing your goals in the first place. So I don't know if I made more confusion than, but what I wanted to ask is, yes, how do you see this need for speed and efficiency because somehow the world requires this from you, and how do you accommodate that with this experience that you have to engage with the person that in a more non not optimizing for efficiency.
so you okay, good thing that you really narrowed that question down. Um all kidding aside, think about it. I find it interesting you talk about efficiency, because it's all about efficiency to arrive at a goal. So it's about the product. And what the world is telling us is it's about products. And what I've been trying to do is say, you know what? I like to think of the etiquette of engagement as putting people first and then moving to process to arrive at a resilient product. Okay. And part of post World War II, I would argue, and I've seen this, and I was fortunate to know both my grandmothers before they passed, and I remember one of them where we're like, "Don't you want these things? Don't you want the latest? Don't you want the most efficient? Don't you want this, that, and the other thing?" She's like, "No, I have no need for those things." And that generation that was pre World War II, that went through the Depression, that went through World War One, that came up through that, they understood the difference between need and want, and they knew what life was, and they went to enjoy life. Okay, and they they enjoyed life because they didn't put it into things, they put it into people, they put it into relationships. Okay, now along comes World War II, and we create these giant military industrial complexes, right? And all of a sudden it became about things, it became about marketing, it became about consumption. Okay, so the messaging that we've received, that we've programmed, that our kids are being programmed with in their generation, it's about consumption. Your value is tied to what you consume. And if you can be more efficient in the way you consume, the better off the larger system is. This is me thinking out loud. This is just how I interpret it. So the funny thing is while I was at University of Virginia and I was teaching, I like to teach courses on resilience and resilience thinking. And one of the things that we've gotten away from is what like the old U.S. Space Administration, NASA used to be like, which was about redundancy, having a backup of a backup of a backup. And in systems thinking, we often people who want products and want yield want reduced redundancy. They want to make an efficient system. But when you make an efficient system, you remove its functional diversity. Okay, you remove all the different pieces because those pieces slow you down to arrive at a product faster. But one of the things that researchers have found, and this is something I believe in, is when you have more functional diversity, when you encounter a disturbance to your system, whatever that system is, you get a bump, you get a disturbance, you get a shock to that system. Having more functional diversity gives you more tools with which to respond. So increased functional diversity gives you increased response diversity. Now, is that efficient? No. But is that resilient in that
Yes.
having it? Yes. So the question is, do we want to design things that produce optimum yield, or what is the appropriate balance of optimum yield versus resilience versus things that fail safely rather than things that are fail safe? Because you and I both know the way that the world works, the way the universe works is a cycling of energy. You go from high energy ordered systems and states to invariably you're going to get a shock to that system, which is going to cause a breakdown and a release of energy, which is going to allow for reconfiguration. So what I've been trying to expose people to, and why I think there's hope, is exposing people to the idea of failing early and often, and learning from how to recover after failing. Okay, and I see a challenge in my own children and the children's generation, and my wife, who in the classroom, that we're teaching kids, and it's not about failing and learning, it's about give me the right answer. And Mauro, I think you and I both are here because we value, we see as a sign of intelligence people who have the ability to ask the right question. Right, we see them as intelligent. That is a mark of real intelligence, that someone can be so insightful that they can ask a question that takes us to the next level. Anybody with Google right now, one of these things, can give you a quote unquote right answer. But how hard is it to find someone who really asks the right question, which challenges all to evolve into a different state? Do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
back to your idea about it's all about efficiency. Well, yeah, and yield in a system, but you have to remember the private sector and industry, they have a different return on investment. They have a different unique selling proposition. We're sitting there, we as human beings, what is our value proposition? What is our unique selling proposition? What is it that we want to do? Do we all want to? I mean, we're older now. We're, almost 10 years old when we first met. What has happened? we're different. Are we better or worse? Well, some things were probably a little bit worse, and some things are probably a little bit better. But we're different, and we have to embrace that difference. And part of embracing the difference is to not think about the efficiency of achieving the next goal, but think about, I've got all these tools to withstand the bumps and the bumps and the slings and arrows of the future. I mean, that to me is, I don't know if I answered your question. You got me riffing off of what you said, but I have
You
hope.
did.
I have,
Well,
you know,
that's, you're talking about resiliency. That's very interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, because having a biology background, I know that that's how natural systems works, right? An ecosystem, it's not really efficient, but it's really resilient. And that's because it has a lot of redundancy, right? You have several species that can perform the same role. So if one goes extinct, you have another. And that's also, and I've been discussing this with some people here on the podcast, this redundancy creates a space for innovation, right?
of course,
Because
of
if
course,
you are one of the redundant parts, I don't have to do this all the time. I can, create something new. And that's how even genomes, there's a lot of evidence that when the genome was duplicated, and
hmm
there are several events of genome duplication throughout evolution, those genes there was a copy of a gene. You didn't need that copy, so it could mutate,
right.
and you could acquire a new functionality, a new trait, because of that redundancy. And yes, every time you're going to duplicate yourselves, you have to make all that extra DNA that you don't use for anything, but that creates the redundancy that allows resiliency. And and it was even beautiful. I made a note of what you said, in like people first, process then, and resilient product. And
Yes.
that's the way to get to a resilient product. And what we have today in the world many times is product that you get to the product fast, it's
Yes.
very efficient, but
Yes.
it's not resilient. And I'm going to make a question out of the script here, because it's coming to my mind now. Do you have an opinion on um, okay, one step back. When I see these companies targeting efficiency, and well, they fail many times. They are more prone to fail, right?
Mhm.
Because if one, and we also saw that during COVID, and but before COVID, in the 2008 economic crisis,
Mhm.
whenever you have a problem, either a disruption in the supply chain or something, you break. But then when you break, that either governments or someone else, they come to help those companies that
Mhm.
made the choice of not investing in redundancy and resilience,
Mhm.
but to invest in efficiency. And I'm asking this not from a political point of view. It's just because I see these bailouts
Mhm.
as as a strong source of um, anxiety, or unhappiness,
Mhm.
or angriness. Like, people are angry because all of this. So do you think that um, the companies got um, lazy because of the bailouts? And how do we have to do, how should we do to go back to, or to go to more resilient products, so we don't have to count on the bailouts?
So Let me take a step back a little bit. So there's a and you can read this book if you haven't read it already earlier. That was Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book Anti-Fragile. And in that he makes a big point about maintaining optionality. And back to your point, a lot of big businesses have used their capital, political, economic, so on, capital to maintain optionality over other systems. Okay. And part of the optionality is they've maintained the option to externalize the costs of their failures, right? They never have to pay for anything. If you or I try to do something and is an individual small business owner, we're on the hook. We fail, it's on us. It's on our few employees. And it's you can kind of think of that. If you go bankrupt, if you owe the bank a lot of money as an individual, right? If you owe them $10,000 or a million reais, they're coming after you to get that money. But if you're a big business and owe them billions of reais, so billions of dollars, you're their buddy, right? And in
Yeah,
some ways, they maintain an optionality. So big businesses have had it both ways, and this is also part of the challenge with the pollution and the downstream effects of things. That if we don't build into the price what it really costs to have a product, and that product it could be mortgages, it could be loans, it could be plastic bottles, it could be some of the pharmaceutical drugs that we know that once we take them and excrete them, they end up as endocrine disruptors in our system. And if I go to Guanabara Bay and I were to go and scoop into Guanabara Bay and take a look, I can probably find endocrine disruptors in that water. Same thing I can in the Chesapeake Bay here in the United States. We don't tend to think of the downstream effects. We tend to not think in systems. We don't, and this goes back to my point. We're more connected with, we're more aware of things and we're connected, but are we really connected? Do we have an appreciation of that connectedness? We're taking actions, not realizing that our actions are part of larger systems. Okay, so in some ways, what we're I keep going back to the Matrix movie where we almost think that we're in our little pod and we can do whatever we want in our little pod and that has no impacts. So if we want to consume electricity, no impact because it's just me on my device. If I want to consume plastic meals or if I want to buy things that give me quote unquote the biggest return on my money, I don't think about how that creates a market, which that market then sets us on a perilous path. You see what I'm getting at? If I make the decision that, you know what, I'm not happy with the clothes I have now, I need to go out and buy a new set of clothes, even though the clothes I have can work, right? It's just a matter of how I maintain the clothes. If it's about me deriving pleasure from consuming, I don't realize how I feed a larger system, as opposed to people saying, hey, there's got to be a different way. And what's interesting is that this younger generation, you asked me earlier if I have hope. This younger generation has realized, whether it's slick marketing of Airbnb or Uber or Lyft, they don't have to own cars or homes, right? They don't have to own things. It's about experiences. It's about how they connect. It's about their, relationships. Now, they might be a little bit misguided in some areas, as the older generations tend to think of all the upcoming younger generations. However, um, what they realize is that they don't have to buy and consume as much. My son, for instance, we're like, don't you want to keep this? Don't you want to keep that? Don't like, no, he's a minimalist because he's like, I don't need these things. I don't need these things to validate who I am. So you ask, that's the quiet revolution, right? That's the quiet revolution. And he became that way because he's had an awareness. He's been exposed to things. He's had intellectual exposure visits at a young age. Not what you can learn from a book, but what can you live? How do you gain through conversations like this? He's benefited from talking to international visitors like you. And what's life like where you're from, Mauro? And you have a conversation. Now, he may have only been 4 or 5 or 6 years old at that time, but he soaked it up like a sponge. What we've missed is that we think that we want the prepackaged, processed product, highly processed. And you and I both know, you from a biological point of view, and you've already pointed it out, that having unprocessed things allows for maybe more microbial interactions. It allows for better use of your microbiome. It allows for better ways of being and connecting. It allows your body to do the synthesizing and working through it. Now, there's a time for highly processed foods, but you and I also know that you look at the amount of people that are unhappy, the unhappy gut health, everything else where we consume stuff that's so processed. Look at the information we consume. It's so processed. We stop thinking about what was life before we had highly processed foods. What was life like when I had to go outside and I could eat the food that I grew in my backyard? What was life like when I found out about what's happening through talking to my neighbors and having a face to face and learning about where they're coming from, as opposed to jumping on a TikTok, Instagram, FaceTime, YouTube, Facebook or YouTube, right? So that processing is another thing that, while it appears to be really efficient, in some ways it's taken away some of that redundancy you talk about, which by taking away that redundancy, it's ironic, we've given up our optionality to have a system that could be more diverse, that could have more options, that could allow us to respond in different ways. Does that make sense? So I don't know if I
It
answered your
does.
question. I don't know if
Yeah, you did. You did. That's great. So I'm if I can try to summarize this, so what I'm getting from all this is I love it, the silent revolution, and this, like, we don't have to consume. I agree with you. And these new business models, they are teaching people, even people like me, not to consume. You don't have to own, like, even sometimes, no, I even something like a house, like, you have all this feeling that you are safer if you own your house. And I'm not sure if that's true anymore. But um, what I took out of what you're saying is that somehow the relationship is the product, okay, in between. So, like, we have to optimize for the relationship, because if we don't need to if products are boring and are not are if they are we don't need them. And what we are, the greatest benefit that we are going to get from things is the relationship itself. So, like, a relationship may lead to a product,
Oh yeah. So
but it was the relationship that was the biggest the benefit, like, the more long standing, if I can say, the more than the product itself. The product may run its course, but you still keep the relationship.
let me come back to that a little bit. So that's why, if you start with people and you focus on those relationships and you learn about the process, you may fail, but you still have, like you said, you still have the relationship and you have the process, and that allows you to try again at a product. Now let's go to
Yes.
relationship real quick. Generally, and you might remember when I was talking about this, but generally you can kind of think of relationships in three different ways. You have kind of like in general classes, if you will. So you might have a relationship that's kind of extractive. Okay. So it's, what can I take? What can I take? What can I extract from this engagement? And this engagement is not just with people, but it's in relationship with things, with the environment, and so on. What can I take? And then you get to one where it's kind of like this for that. All right. A transactional. I give you this, you give me that. It's transactional. So, okay. Um, but then you have another one, and this is where I think that I have hope for, is I think that people haven't really engaged with this notion of, or embracing the uncertainty of, what is it like to have a transformational relationship? Does that make sense? What is it like to move from the extractive, all right, to move away from that towards the transformative? What is it? And yes, we get transactional. I pay this, you give that, that kind of thing. I mean, we understand that, give and take, right? However, transformational is that buy into a belief that one plus one is not just equal to two. One plus one could be much more than two, right? That goes back to almost your idea of, every time a cell replicates, there's the potential at a transformative action, right? That's what those
Yes.
genes lay down. There's that possibility, and nature finds a way to do that. In the way that we interact with human beings, what if we were transformative in the way where we're open to embracing uncertainty, we're surrendering control, and we're letting ourselves move with the energy around us, realizing that things happen. That's all they ever do. Things happen, and we embrace that uncertainty and realize that we'll come out on the other side. And that might allow us, I think, when we first started, you were talking about, hey, man, I'm getting older. I'm feeling this. I'm not sure what it's going to be like when I'm older, right? I went through some health issues. I went through a lot of health issues on the back. and I'm aware at the time. I went through some health issues on the back, and one of the things that one of my pain specialists told me is we have to avoid the concept of anticipatory shitdom. Right? Let me explain. Anticipatory shitdom. And what that means is if things are terrible today, okay, they're terrible today, and then you start feeling the pressure of society and telling you you're only getting older. You feel you're getting older. It can only get worse. Don't buy into that. They may be different, but they do not have to be worse. So if we can avoid anticipatory shitdom, which is what people trying to sell us stuff and extract from us want, I think we'd be in a much better place to move towards the transformative. So I don't know if I answered your question. I know that time's running a little short.
This is a beautiful way of like ending this conversation. I do have three like rapid fire questions for you before I let you go. But it
Okay.
was, it's always so nice to talk to you, Robert. I'm going to say, like, you helped me in this moment find out what I want to optimize for, which is authenticity, because I
There you
think
go.
that these relationships, they like products that are result of a production line, and those that are result of authentic interaction. The relationships
Oh,
that
hey, Tom.
they are authentic, they are the best ones. So I'm going to do some homework uh, on that. The three questions. The first is, which book you are reading right now?
Oh Lord. I've got a number that I've kind of started. One is I'm looking at them
Which
right
one
now.
you read yesterday? Like,
Oh, I haven't. So part of the challenge I find is I don't read books as much as I read the short thought pieces, 1,000 word ones. But I've been reading a lot about COP26, and I've been reading a lot of Atlantic articles. I can't give you the title because I just soak up things.
okay,
One of the
that's
things I'll
okay.
say is the Disciplined Minds is one book that I've been reading. Okay, and I've been really pushing back on Disciplined Minds. The other one that I've been looking into and working through is The Entrepreneurial State, and that's a book about the United States in
Yeah, I
terms of
read the
yeah, you know
Mariana
that one.
Mazzucato.
Yeah. So I've been looking into that, but what I've been doing is reading smaller bits and pieces and a lot more about philosophies of engagement, smaller ones, and I would almost call them, and I'm ashamed to say this, and I'll admit it to you, more like factoids. More like factoids in the sense that I hear, just as you're getting a little bit of a morsel or a petishko from me about what's going on. I read some of the smaller ones for my chicken soup for the soul kind of experience. I'm finding that in my world today, in my current position, I do not have as much time to sit back and absorb a book, and that to me is one of my real shortcomings that I want to get into. I have to retrain my mind. So you got me on that one. That's a short question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then the second one, I think it's going to be challenging for you. Do you take short or long lunch breaks? If you don't have time to read, that's
Well, if I don't, what I do instead is I've been getting these things right here with my Bluetooth, and I put this in my pocket, and I have business calls while I walk my dog. So
the
I take
connection is
yeah. I don't know if you hear me now.
yes,
Okay.
better.
So what I have is I have headphones, my Bluetooth, my cell phone,
Uh-huh.
and I have two dogs that I have to take on a walk. And I take that walk through the woods. And sometimes I have conversations with my family, with my mother, with my sister, my brother, or I have it with friends. Sometimes I take work calls while I'm walking up and down the street. So I build into my time walk and talk, and I also build about 10 to 15 minutes of quiet time in my backyard looking at the trees and listening to birds. So I do that
Great.
whenever, and it's not the same time every day because of the schedule, but I get outside and I listen.
Okay. Final question. Bitcoin, are you a believer or a non-believer?
So I haven't come, I'm paying for two kids to go to college right now. So my ability to invest in that is kind of greatly diminished because I'm paying into the higher education machine. However, I have colleagues that they've been right over the 30 years I've known them, and they're big believers in it. And I am looking into crypto, and I think it's one of these things that I am grateful that I'm in a position where I can take a relatively small stake in something, and I'm exploring both versions, Bitcoin, but the other one I keep forgetting, and I always conflate it in my mind. It begins the one that begins with
Ethereum,
E.
Ethereum,
Yeah. So I've
Ethereum.
been thinking of yes, and I've been trying to be wise, and I realized just as we've talked about diversity and how we compose ourselves and functional diversities, that is part of my portfolio. I'm going to have to embrace that, and I have a plan to embrace that before the end of the year by cost averaging.
Yes. So you already have some, or
No, I've got the application actually sitting here. Do that. I plan to buy.
great.
I've been doing the research on it. Yes. So I want to round out
Great.
my portfolio.
Okay. Bob, it was as always a pleasure. We could, like go on
Well,
and on. Maybe what we have to do is just not to wait for, 5 years to
yeah.
talk to each other again. And thank you so much.
Oh, no, you're welcome. And I will say this, Mauro, back to your point about authentic connections. The fact that you and I have not spoken in detail for over 5 years ought to tell your listeners something, that you can have these kind of chance encounters, these chance meetings, and not unlike a gene that undergoes some mutation that sticks. Some of these encounters that we have, they impart an energy that lasts so much longer than the actual encounter, and you're one of those. So I appreciate your
Yes.
time. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, Bob.
Be
Bye
well. Bye
bye, my
bye.
friend.